he doing it now? Are you following what he's doing? I don't know.
So you do something else. Here we go.
Okay. So, very, very warm welcome to all of you to the Dale Carnegie Expert Forum. It was exactly in 2016, just 3 years ago, here in Delhi, in this very venue, when we launched our first Expert Forum. And we were so enthused by the response and the feedback that we got that we made it an annual event. And since then, we've actually taken it, it's a rotating event, so we took it to Mumbai, and then we took it to Bangalore, and now we are happy to be back in Delhi again. And through this entire 3 years, actually, many of you have been to all three of them and traveled with us, and some of you are coming back the second time, and some of you may be coming in here for the first time. So for the benefit of those who are coming for the first time, just wanted to tell you what this forum is really all about. Essentially, we came up with this whole idea to create an initiative or a forum which was really an intellectual space for HR leaders to share their experiences, views, deliberate, debate, and take something away, maybe add value to each other. It's a peer network. There's a lot of value addition that happens. And it's really been, I think, thanks to all of you, that it has been such a success. The feedback has been that people do take away very tangible thoughts from an interaction like this, and we are very enthused with that feedback. Over the last 3 years, we have discussed lots of contemporary issues that have been on the minds of HR people around the world. We've discussed cross-cultural leadership in different cultural milieus. We've discussed workplace cultures. We've discussed employee engagement, the holy grail, and what actually people have to do to make it succeed. I think for the better part of the last decade, all these challenges and changes in HR have been underscored by technology. And technology has really it's changed the world of work completely, and intelligent machines have brought in a complete new dynamic. I think earlier all HR people will agree it was easy to offer rewarding careers through just straightforward, steady development and career paths. That's no longer the ball game, right? With artificial intelligence, frankly, business models are getting broken and created faster than we can actually even spell it. So the need for continuous skilling and the need for learning new things has never been stronger. And in these days where we believe that people, millennials and people who don't stay in the same job for too long, in what I think Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, said, careers today are tours of duty. So organizations are actually preparing or working on organization designs that assume that people will just stay with you for a few years only. And in that context, I think it makes a lot of sense for companies to speed towards technology and to help improve productivity. And that has its own implications, therefore, for both employers and employees. And that's why at Dale Carnegie, we decided to delve into how to make people successful in the era of artificial intelligence. And that's what we want to discuss with you today. And looking forward to, I'm sure all of you have perspectives and experiences that we are looking forward to sharing, but we also have a global research which we want to share. And before we get to that, I want to introduce the Dale Carnegie panel that has come from virtually different continents around the world. I'll start with the youngest, the digital native on the panel, so possibly has a view. That's very interesting. Also is possibly the only computer science engineer and information systems engineer on the panel. So he is, he owns the Sydney operation of Dale Carnegie and has been actually with Dale Carnegie for over 10 years, working in Australia and New Zealand. In the process, he has helped companies with their organizational and leadership development, companies. He's worked with a variety of companies, and prior to that, he has experience with startups and as well as multinational corporations. So thanks for coming, Jordan. And I'll move to the other lady on the panel. Juliet Dennett is the managing director of Northern UK. And she's also the president of the International Dale Carnegie Franchise Association, which is a very influential body which makes her a very powerful voice in the global strategy for Dale Carnegie. But she's in her own right a very strong coach, speaker, trainer, and a very successful business owner. And prior to Dale Carnegie, she held leadership positions with Revlon and IBM. I'm going to introduce Sanjay Jha, who possibly needs no introduction because many of you may be familiar with him for at least one of the various hats that he wears, either as a politician or as a cricket commentator or as a speaker, a very sought-after executive coach. He is the executive director of Dale Carnegie of India. And I chose to come to Dr. Mark Maroon at the end because he is the man of the moment today. He is the one who is responsible for all the research that happens in Dale Carnegie. He holds the position of Director of Thought Leadership, and he's prolific with his research. But what I particularly admire about him is that with that reams of data from across countries that he gets, he really is able to incisively pull out a point of view that actually brings in new insight. So that really is very powerful and valuable, and he has been the force behind our expert forums because that is the information that he's creating sitting out of Florida for the whole world to consume. So he's going to be moderating the session today, but just before that, for those of you who don't know me, and I think I know most of you, I am the managing director of Dale Carnegie of India. I've been leading the business for the last 16 years here. It's been a great journey. Prior to that, I was with HCC for a short while as the executive director, and then, well, much prior to that, I started my career at Procter & Gamble. So that's me, and once again, thank you to all of you for being here, and some of you have come from Mumbai and Chennai and different places, so I really appreciate taking the time out. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Pallavi, and again, thank you all for coming. I know some are as far away from Bangalore, and some of you may have even taken longer to get here if you're on the other side of Delhi. So I was here my first time here, and it's a real pleasure to be here and talk about artificial intelligence. And you know, there's so much about artificial intelligence and so much that's being written about every day. It can become overwhelming. And we could probably talk for 2 days on artificial intelligence, but I want to be sure that we cover what's important to you. And I think and I hope that you're able to learn as much from each other as you are from Dale Carnegie. So let me first, I want to go around and to that point and have everyone introduce themselves very briefly and just talk a little bit about you know, what's your experience with artificial intelligence and or what you would hope to get from today's event. But before I do that, I just want to you know, be clear that Dale Carnegie are not technology experts. And it's very important that we understand that the focus is really on the people. And our point of view is that if people aren't engaged, if they're not positive, if they're not optimistic about embracing it, then any technology will fail. And so if you have really tough questions about supervised versus unsupervised machine learning and those types of things, then maybe we'll have Sanjay.
Who will always have an answer for something, anything, right?
So before I get into the agenda today, why don't we start to my left and just really briefly go around and introduce yourself and let us know what you hope to get from today's event.
So I'm A.K. Balyan. I've been in the oil and gas industry for about 40 years. been in the public sector, which is not so technologically savvy, but now rapidly changing. Then we worked in a joint venture, combination of a private sector and a government sector, is a totally different kind of work culture there, and a private sector, a truly private sector, very technologically savvy and willing to go a next step there. Practically in the oil and gas sector, I see a lot of applications of I can't say really artificial intelligence right now, but then technology. Without technology, they cannot really move ahead today. This is the kind of thing. So I think that's the area where we like to see how AI can be very helpful besides the normal operations of a company.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Ajay. I work with KPMG, leading the talent management space with them. Your question specific to my experience with artificial intelligence and the allied areas. To be very honest, mixed bag. I still don't have that kind of clarity that the AI really contributes the way it is expected to, and the multiple research speak of multiple contribution areas and the speed of contribution of AI to various aspects of the organization. So would like clarity around that. From a takeaway, it'll be interesting to understand as HR professionals through the research, what could be some of the new skills that would be emerging and that organizations need to be prepared for tomorrow. So that's one takeaway that I would expect from the research. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Adil Bandukwala. I think this is my third roundtable at Dale Carnegie. I've attended the one in Bangalore and Mumbai as well, and always fascinated with the kind of insights that come from here. Really excited today about learning on how AI is going to make and enable people to thrive, because AI can be an enabler, and anytime we get insights on how it can act as an enabler are great, so that we can take that back and help our organization and our customers thrive. I represent Belong. It's a startup which is an AI talent platform backed by Sequoia Capital. I'm based in Bangalore.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vishal Manchanda. I represent Indus Towers. I look after learning and development and employee engagement for them. My perspective on AI or any digital transformation is in one word: it's anything but digital. So it's all human, and how we look at the research and see it can help in transforming organizations to move towards AI, because it will not happen on its own. You may have the programs written, you may have the DevOps and Agile and all the R, Python available, but how do you actually use it on a daily basis and get people to change their daily way of working? If this research focuses on that and gives insight, I think that will be useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ritu, and I come from Canon. So been in Canon for about 14 years now. So in Canon itself is going through a lot of transformation with digital disruption that's happening in our industry. And we as an organization is transforming, and learning and development plays a very critical role in bringing the capability of people up. And technology is a huge, big, solid pillar for us to make learning happening. So we have experimented with technology a lot in the last couple of years, and we start with something as simple as the problem of people, especially at the frontline level, and use technology in a simple way to help them overcome it. So people come first, technology comes later, and that's what's working for us in our initial experimentation. So today I hope to learn from others and shorten my own learning curve as we are experimenting a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aditi Julka, and I am with Dale Carnegie. I head the consulting and performance management for them. So one of the key things that I'm really looking forward to it is how do we make training and learning and development a place where people actually want to be a part of the changes that the organization are taking forward through technology. So I would really be interested in looking at that. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Neeru Mehta and I'm part of Global Logic. That's a product engineering organization, consulting organization. Now, what's very interesting is with a lot of our clients, we are in a journey where they are transforming, and it's digital transformation. And most of our employees are actually much ahead of us in this technology piece. They are actually leveraging AI, ML, all the advanced technologies we can think of, and transforming our customers. So how do we catch up with them? Because we probably are still a little dinosaur age, when it comes to really being ahead or deal with them. And now it's not just millennials, we are Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, so 5 generations. We actually have a virtual employee also already. His name is Andrew. And he's actually part of a, he's actually transformed work for some of the projects already. And it's quite interesting to see, how more and more use cases within can be worked out. And I'm actually very, very excited because a lot of work, and this has been a problem of ages, that how can HR or how can, we really become more strategic and very, very personalized or uber personalized for our employees in their L&D space, and how can our employees have a Netflix kind of experience today, which is not there. It's still a long way to go, and how AI can help leverage that is something definitely we look forward to. Yes, I want to learn a lot from all of your experiences about this as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Upasna. I'm the HR lead at eValueServe. We also have a virtual employee. So we have someone called Amber. She works with us in the areas of employee engagement. So we have started, toying with the idea of AI. We have done some bit of work, but I think we're just evolving. And of course, all the questions that people asked and perspectives they shared, that all makes sense. Personally, for me, I'm just looking for maybe, some insights on, is this a fad or is this here to stay? The more I kind of think about AI and experiment with it, the more I feel the need for more human touch. So it's a kind of paradox at this point in time. So while on one hand you do see a lot of merits, with respect to efficiencies or just taking the work off, people who were doing a lot of heavy lifting and stuff like that. But on the other hand, really, the whole humane part of HR. Are we really compromising on that somewhere? So that's I believe a golden debate, and we'll continue to figure out what the answers are. But right now, I think it's a pretty wide, open canvas that we'll need to see what painting we want to paint on that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. C. Jayakumar. I work for Larsen & Toubro. I head HR for the construction division of L&T. Basically from a brick and mortar company. I've been working in this company for the last 31 years. Yeah, started the career at L&T and continuing. Last 2 years back, we got into a digital transformation, the whole organization. We also looked into all the HR processes, identified where all we can get into digitalization, prioritized based on business need as well as the ease of implementation. In the area of artificial intelligence, we have used a little bit in the space of talent acquisition. We used a startup called Skillate, where we parse the resumes, compare with JD, and then give a stack ranking for which can be done. And in our ATL Next, we widely use it for prioritizing and putting the next content based on similar to Netflix experience, feeding them with different contents based on the learning style as well as the content what they browse, etc. And what is quite interesting today is, for me, the topic, because we widely use RPA, robotic process automation, in our SSC. If emotions can be brought inside robotic process automation, it becomes AI. That is my feeling. So this is a very quite interesting topic. If I get an opportunity to do another PhD, definitely this will be the topic.
Thank you.
Automobile retail. Honestly, AI for me right now is, it's at a learning phase. I've not been exposed. But the two perspectives that I have, I'm pretty optimistic on the fact that AI is actually going to enhance productivity. AI is actually going to help countries increase their economy. Pessimistic because there's a report from the Oxford University which says AI is actually going to beat humans at work by 2063, and a lot of jobs are actually going to get redundant. So that pessimism comes from the fact of, and when you're talking to people around, it's that fear in people of losing their jobs. But it's good to be optimistic, I think, and I look forward to a great learning session here in the afternoon. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Anil Chawla. I work with Tata Consultancy Services. I was heading the HR for TCS Delhi till about a couple of years back, and last 2.5 years I've been working on data privacy, the GDPR program of TCS. My specific interest is, you mentioned that you have a couple of virtual, one each. We have many virtual employees. I mean, being large, we have virtual employees in practically every function. Now, the challenge that I face is they tend to do everything they want to do with data. So I'm there to rein in, tell them this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, given GDPR coming in. So I'm very keen to know to what extent the proponents of artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., they are going to push the envelope. And that is why I'm in business.
Thank you. Kumar, I represent Bharat Petroleum. I currently head the learning function in BPCL and been there for about 2 decades. As regards AI, we are more in the project stage, not really into actively deploying them at the moment. But the challenge for me as a learning head has been, today we are more into the brick and mortar kind of training, and here is a situation where my business heads are not willing to release any of them for the brick and mortar training. On the other side, you have the youngsters who form 60% of my population who are not interested in brick and mortar training, as well as the fact, that business wants to drive learning. So it's a very complex situation that I have, more like a triangular love story. So trying to find some solution during the insights today.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Umesh Dhal from LG Electronics. I've spent 35 years in the area of HR. I think Dr. Balyan will agree with me, or most of you, that we have seen a big transition. If I go back 35 years ago, the technology started coming into our human resource area. Initial start of technology, as Manu said, that time also it was a big threat. The technology coming in, people were resisting only because of one fact, that it was taken as a threat to human beings. But if I see today's age, the real invasion of technology today, I don't think the threat perception is so huge. Yes, definitely, some propaganda may take place, but today, most of the organization, at least, we are trying to put the real intelligence in place to use artificial intelligence. And we see a big usage. The entire availability of the data and the technology today equips us to proactively prepare ourselves for the customer need and future threat perceptions. I think we are working in a big way to make real use of the current situation of AI. I don't know how it will ultimately shape up, but as of now, we feel that yes, it is going to be one big positive tool for us to be more closer to our customer and their needs. That's how we look at it. I'm sure today's input, whatever I'll get, will be useful for our organization. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Purobi Mitra, and I work with Dale Carnegie India. And I've been here for almost 5 years now, and I'm proud to say that I'm a part of the quality team. I manage teams. I'm a master trainer. And one of the reasons that we are excited to be here is to understand the various perspectives that can actually open up avenues to embrace this resistance, this change, this fear that people have towards technology, and to look at pathways coming from all of you in this forum that can create solutions so that we as well at Dale Carnegie can bridge the gap between people and technology. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aparna Dhingra. I head HR for BMW India. So it's very interesting, this topic, artificial intelligence or digital disruption. But I quite strongly agree with what Umesh said. I think AI or digital disruption has been for many, many years. You know, from the 1900s, I think ever since the Industrial Revolution started in US and we had the first T model from Ford, I think way back even before that, I think, disruption in technology, machines has been since then. It's just taken different names and different forms. You know, we had, when IBM first launched, the Blue Sea or, Watson. I think ever since then the name has changed, but artificial intelligence, as we call it today, has always stayed, and I think it's here to stay. I think there is, of course, a perceptible threat behind that how will it take away jobs, and will robots start firing people? And I think that threat has been there ever since, the Industrial Revolution ever started. I think, but it's very interesting to know, at least from a BMW context, I think it's very interesting because the industry in itself, the automobile industry in itself is completely changing, and the kind of digital revolution that we are seeing in automobiles is absolutely crazy. But I don't think so. That kind of digital revolution is happening in the HR framework as fast as it's happening in the business landscape. So I think it'll be interesting to know from your research that, how our organization internally equipping and handling and ensuring that the employees are able to handle that disruption, which is there anyways here. It's been there always. But how do you ensure that, from an HR point of view, we are walking that as in the same pace as the organizations or the businesses? So I think I'm looking forward to a very learning session from all of you, and specifically looking forward to the research you have to share. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Devika. I represent AkzoNobel. AkzoNobel is widely, I guess, known for Dulux paints. And my view on this is that many years back when computers had come in, and there used to be roles handled by computer operators, and there were separate roles, really. So I would really want to know whether, today computer is part of every role, and each one of us is really using it. So will AI really be used really in each role, and will require this massive upskilling the way it was required during those times, rather than AI really taking away jobs? Because I feel, I don't know if the research is indicating that, but I really feel that the research should indicate that the skill will be really used by each one of us in our areas, and we will really need to do a mindset shift and upskilling in this area. Second is coming to HR. Over there I feel that AI is really a bit hyped right now. We see a lot of vendors in the market, starting from recruitment to engagement to various other HR processes where there are tools and apps, and AI is being used. But however, at the same time, I see in organizations a struggle for basic data, a struggle for basic usage of HR systems, a struggle for of systems integrating with each other. Separate systems are talking separate languages, really. So it will, this research, I really want to know that how AI will integrate with the HR in each of the areas, and also with the current systems, really. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sharmishta Mitra from M&M. Very interesting perspective. So, like Aparna said, my business is also into automobile in a big way. So AI for us is a very integral part now of our existence as far as business is concerned. But very interestingly, what we realize is, while we have made the investment, while we are all aware of the power of it, I think we are pretty much trying to figure out how to really leverage it. So I think that's the first challenge that we see. And the second one, I think, some of us, we did a research on future of work. This was a couple of years back. And what it essentially threw us, I think we deep dived into many research, but one helped us a lot was a research by McKinsey. And we'd say that because of the cost of automation being very high and technology, etc., so it's only around 20, so two perspectives. So it's around 2035, if we are moving at a fast pace, you will see all of these getting implemented. So some of us who are at a certain age, we looked at each other and said, okay by the time we are mostly done. And of course, the pace was to garner, let's say, around between 35 to 50. However, what they also said is a lot of shifts will start happening between what you exactly are talking about. The human-machine partnerships, however, is something that organizations will start moving in. And that's where there were job losses predicted if there was not upskilling done. And that's where some of the disruptions and they had given some interesting statistics in countries like India and China where population is higher. It's important for large corporations to partner with academia for skilling, for governments for some social protectionism rules, etc., etc. So when, Mark, you talked about the human impact, would like to know more, because I know as a business, it's here to stay. It's going to grow. But we have to figure out the very dynamic that's going to emerge with it, and if we are prepared through a collective understanding and through research, that will be great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Kashyap. I represent a company called AIG. And AIG this year is celebrating 100 years of existence, because of which there are thousands of systems which already exist, right? And this company is extremely regulated considering the nature of business we are in. In India, we do their back office operations, and we opened up our RPA COE a couple of years back. So from a bot perspective, or creation of bot perspective, there are 40 live bots today in India. But they are class 1 bots which need supervision, right? And the only time HR was consulted was when they wanted an employee ID of the bot and they wanted to Christian the bot. Other than that, I don't think HR was anywhere involved in creation of the bot, right? So I personally feel from a business standpoint, I think we still are evolved and are evolving or at stage 2 versus HR L&D, we are still at stage 0. Because our intervention is minimalistic, right? So I'm here to gain exposure in terms of how can HR L&D contribute in that AI space. But otherwise, from business standpoint, I think at least AIG is, India is way ahead of a lot of competitors in terms of this space. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nischay. If you're ever looking for, confirmation or validation of a career choice that you've made, look at the conferences and what's being covered in conferences, what's being written about. Yesterday I was in Chennai at the NASSCOM HR Summit and spoke about skilling and the use of technology. Actually did a fireside chat with Accenture, Kala from Accenture. In the morning, Adil and me recorded a podcast on skilling and the use of technology. And now we're at this expert forum session talking about AI and its application to the field of learning. So thank you. I think I made a good career choice 7 months ago when I moved from KPMG, where I played the role of a senior partner, and now have joined EdCast. EdCast, in fact, is a global pioneer in the field of learning using artificial intelligence. In fact, our tagline is the Netflix of knowledge and learning. It's fascinating to see the adoption of technology in the field of learning. In fact, we already have, I think, over 100 global companies that are part of our journey together and have embraced technology to further their learning agenda. Clearly making, choices of personalization, of democratization, of really fulfilling the need of scale and speed, which I think is impossible without the use of technology. I am truly interested because I believe that by holding this forum and picking the topic of AI, you've joined the force. And I'm very keen to see the research. There's some very interesting research Accenture's put out called New Skilling. If you haven't come across that research, have a look at that. Of course, the LinkedIn Learning Report, which of 2019 speaks about the skill gap and how technology is playing a big part in bridging that skill gap and creating a future-ready workforce. So I'm really, really heartened to see that you've picked this as a subject. Even though it's not mainstream, I do believe it will become mainstream for all organizations in times to come. So thank you once again, Sanjay and Pallavi, for having me here. It's been 3 years of great conversations, and I look forward to many more.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And I did just want to be remiss if I didn't recognize the people on the outside of the room, Pallavi's team, who are incredibly impressive and do a fantastic job. And so just a really quick round of applause for Pallavi and her wonderful team. So let me just start with today's agenda then. So we want to begin by talking about the expected impact of artificial intelligence on the human workforce, and specifically, what are the attitudes and the opinions of employees? I mean, this is really critical, I think, to understand. We want to look at, of course, and showcase our research and some research of others. We talk about McKinsey, some PwC, Google research, and of course, they have much larger budgets, so some of their research is a little more sophisticated. But what we have is, and I'll talk more about the methodology and what countries were involved. And then, as I heard, and a pleasure to hear, that we'll talk about the implications of leaders, and specifically HR leaders, in preparing their people to succeed. So I think that sounded like that covers what everyone was hoping to hear today.
You are going to be sharing?
No.
Okay. So we don't have to take copious notes.
It went, but,
Welcome to the India Expert Forum, New Delhi, 2019.
Okay.
Welcome to the India Expert Forum, New Delhi, 2019. Beyond technology, preparing people for the human-machine partnerships of the future. Artificial intelligence refers to IT systems that sense, comprehend, learn, and act much like humans. AI is all around us, and it's changing the way people live and work, promising advances in automation, predictability, and decision-making. It is estimated to contribute about $16 trillion to the global economy in the next 10 years. Consider the impact AI will have on the workplace. According to one study, 60% of all jobs will be at least partially automated by 2030. AI will impact corporate culture and engagement too. 64% of leaders are worried about the effect it will have on their corporate culture. It will change the way we work and the skills required to succeed, creating new opportunities, but also new risks. To achieve success with AI, companies will need people who are agile, confident, and positive. Dale Carnegie surveyed more than 3,500 people across 11 countries and identified barriers to success. Employees are concerned about privacy, fairness, and AI's implication for their jobs. 63% said they are worried about human bias in AI systems. They want to be reassured on the why, what, and how around AI applications. To feel positive about it in their company, 76% of employees said it's important to have a good understanding of AI. And they must be confident they will have the skills to transition into a workplace with AI. 68% believe it is important to gain additional training in order to avoid losing their jobs to AI. Resolve these issues and employees are 3 times more likely to get on board. Look beyond the technology to preparing your team to succeed in the world of AI. Please allow me to introduce our Dale Carnegie presenters for today's event. Pallavi Jha, our host for today's event and Managing Director, Dale Carnegie, India. Mark Marone, our facilitator for this event and Director, Research and Thought Leadership, Dale Carnegie & Associates. Juliette Dennett, Managing Director, Dale Carnegie, Northern England. Jordan Wang, Managing Director, New South Wales, Dale Carnegie, Australia. We invite you to join into today's conversation and learn how HR leaders can prepare their organization for success in an era of artificial intelligence.
So that's our research and the panel today. So thank you very much for coming.
By the way, there is a Facebook application now which gives you a
To make you look much
Rembrandt-type
older.
rendition of the photographs that you were just showing. I
Ah.
just saw it today. You can put your photo up and it gives you that type of
Yeah.
image. I just thought I'd share that.
Possibly also tell you how you will look 50 years from
Yeah,
now.
yeah, that one.
Yeah.
That one too.
It's trending.
It's trending.
So I won't be doing all the talking. Of course, we have the panel, and as I showcase, we show data from their respective countries. I'll ask them to chime in. And again, we have some slides for discussion points that you're free to stop and talk about. And if there's anything else along the way, I do want to make sure we get through everything. It is somewhat lengthy, and but certainly really look forward to hearing what you have to say. And so, you know, there are many definitions of artificial intelligence. This one is quite simple. IT systems that sense, comprehend, act, and learn. And according to our research, 42% said their company is already using some form of AI, and this is in the original 11 countries study. 35% said they believe there are plans in the works. So, we see, despite what we often think of as hype or that this is something out in the future, we see that it's now. Obviously, very nascent in some industries, but it's certainly from the employees that we surveyed, they're starting to see it in their organizations. And of course, AI really has touched so many different areas, different industries. Pallavi sent me an article the other day where this AI application used amino acids to create music. And it's the imagination is unlimited, the capability is apparently unlimited. And this, of course, as you could probably guess, is an AI-generated artwork that two French engineers designed based on the famous painters of the Renaissance and beyond that took a conglomeration of these to create this. And it went to auction at Christie's. It was just thought that it might go for $7,000 to $10,000, and as you may know, it went for over $430,000. So it's so prevalent in so many different areas. I mean, look at some of the expected milestones. We know that driverless trucking, driverless cars are right around the corner. There's several organizations that are making inroads in developing this. The prediction is that by 2049, AI could write a best-selling novel. By 2053, replace humans as surgeons. And as I think Manu might have mentioned, by 2063, surpassing humans at all work tasks. And so, again, it's in our everyday life in addition to in the organizations. So what's the projected impact on total employment? And again, this is a McKinsey study that looked at by country full-time equivalent hours with the potential to be automated just by 2030, so around 10 years away. And we see some of these more industrial countries, Japan, Germany, US, that will have a high relative FTE of automation. And this is conservative, I think. This, I know IBM and PwC have more recently come out with some numbers that suggest it could be much higher. Yep. So what is the human advantage versus the machine advantage? And we talk about humans and machines working together and enabling each other. Clearly there are those activities that are automatable, that are routine tasks. And it's important to keep that in mind because this doesn't mean that AI will necessarily replace jobs. It will replace parts of jobs, right? Those activities that are replicable. And as we look at it, those activities that are generally low on social intelligence and creative intelligence. And we talk about creative intelligence is fairly straightforward. Social intelligence really is the ability to understand the other person, to engage with them, those interpersonal skills. And you often hear the difference between social and emotional intelligence, where By some definitions, emotional intelligence is more of that inward managing of emotions as you engage with others to ensure that you can read those emotions, but also manage those internally, where the social intelligence really is about the other person. And you look at some of these different types of jobs, predictable physical activities, collecting, processing data, that require really very low social and creative intelligence, as opposed to those managing and developing people. And so this begins to show where the human contribution is, right? And as humans and machines, as I said, enable each other, machines will then do a better job, have higher predictability, better decision making when augmented by humans, and humans will do likewise when augmented by machines. So some of the near-term potential automation by work activities, as alluded to in the prior one, here was some data. And so I think as organizations look at this, they can begin to think about where are their activities focused in, right? And this gives some indication of the automatability, right, where organizations can find those areas, those activities that artificial intelligence and machine learning will really benefit the organization and its productivity. And so we ask in this business briefing that we've run in a form of it in some other cities, and we ask, so where does the majority of your activities, either in your group or in your daily work world, fall on these? And give some indication again as to how automatable and when exactly that automation could take place. So, and I think this is what's really important we can focus on, and any questions about this. And really it's the challenges for HR and management. And one of the key challenges I think that we probably all deal with is the lack of large data sets. Oftentimes, machine learning applications that are introduced really for predictability and for decision-making accuracy rely on very large data sets. And even those that are focused on hiring, sourcing, interviewing, et cetera, can often fall prey to this lack of data. In fact, most companies only hold data on the employees that they have. If you want a more accurate data set, you actually need data on employees that weren't hired, right? If we're only looking and feeding data into an application that are those employees that do well, then we're missing everyone else that may have done well but weren't part of that data. It can be challenging to define what makes an employee good. And we'll talk about in a bit the other HR applications that are involved around every point within the employee journey. And the idea with predictability is everyone wants the best employees who will stay with the company. But what does that mean? What is a good employee? And defining that, in order to be able to create and write an algorithm is very difficult, right? I mean, I think if we just ask ourselves, what makes a good employee in my company? And of course, it gets back to the data. Do we have data based on that? And we'll talk about transparency, and the real critical thing for HR as they begin to socialize artificial intelligence throughout the organization is that they need to be transparent. One of the key, as you saw in the video, one of the key concepts or foundational pieces of our point of view. And the more complex algorithms are, the harder they are to explain. Right? And then there's this tension between predictive power and appropriateness. And you see examples of this. For example, Amazon, who had an AI application for hiring engineers, and it biased against women because the data that were used to go into it were the male engineers. And so clearly that's not something appropriate, but it may have good predictable power, right? And so HR leaders need to think about and balance this. How do we trade off and how do we weigh what's efficient and what's appropriate? And then finally, people decisions have profound consequences. And you know, you often hear, well, isn't this just like change management, you know, artificial intelligence? You know, you go through mergers and acquisitions, and there's change management. You go through other types of organizational upset, and there's change management. We argue that those decisions that are human-related, that revolve around HR, have much higher consequences, much more important consequences, right? It's not just people losing their jobs, which, you know, I think as we pointed out, what was shown in the data is not an overwhelming majority. However, their jobs and their responsibilities will change. They'll be required to do different things. And so this is very personal, right? So these are the challenges for HR and management. Yes, please do. Yes.
Just to add a quick point, I mean, so one thing in my career I've always been really passionate about is how do you leverage technology to impact people and impact people performance. And one thing I've always kind of realized is oftentimes it's, when it comes to data, which is a critical part of this, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you guys even think about, you know, recently Microsoft had the chatbot, Tay, right, released onto the internet thinking, all right, we're gonna model this chatbot after reality, after the world. And so there can be, obviously no wrong can come from releasing this chatbot into the, you know, the space of the internet. And within 24 hours it was shut down, with the direct quote being something like, Tay started off with, humans are super cool, and ended up as a just racist. Right, if you think about the amount of, you know, comments and information on the internet. So when it comes to AI, obviously understanding, you know, the right kind of data and the relevant kind of data that needs to feed into the right outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, there's so many applications now that are being developed on a daily basis, machine learning, and traditionally, well, I don't know about traditionally, but what we see more of are the chatbots, those that are service and sales related, of course. Financial activities have and are very automatable and have been developed around and within different applications. So, you know, you have these different areas. In human resources, we see a tremendous growth just in the last year or two around the algorithms that really, if you will, apply to employees at different parts of the employee journey, from pre-screening to screening to onboarding to learning and development. And some of the things specifically around human resources, as I mentioned, was candidate sourcing. HireVue and Maya are two of those that help organizations evaluate candidates via video interviews. Video interviewing, sentiment analysis, where you may have heard about where these applications, such as Vibe, that analyzes keywords and emojis that are sent among employees on Slack. And this is to gauge whether a team is feeling happy, stressed, or disappointed or irritated. So applications that are attempting to read employees' emotions and where they are. Keen Corp was another one, which provides a real-time snapshot of employee engagement by searching emails where no one knows who their name is, right? And uncover word patterns, et cetera. Predictive models, there are now, as you all may know, applications that help to predict whether an employee will stay in the organization. IBM suggests that their application, Watson, is able to predict with a 95% probability as to whether or not an employee will stay. So clearly there are important implications here. And then service provision. There are a lot of applications now, HealthJoy as an example, that help employees identify the best benefits packages, health and wellness, financial benefits, and that type of thing. So we also see it in management. You know, we know, according to Accenture, in other words, and others, 54% of managers' time is spent on administrative coordination and control. And all of these things, again, are automatable. We talk about productivity tracking, as I alluded to. Coaching. You know, there hasn't yet, at least in my research, found anything that's that's powerful and specific to coaching throughout the life cycle of an employee, but there are specific, you know, coaching around engagement with a customer, right? And so, again, being developed on a daily basis. Performance management, and then reward recognition and compensation. And then on the learning and development side, self-service onboarding, content management, personalized learning assessments, and we all may be familiar with some of these. And so the question is then, you know, how likely do you think these new applications are to change HR and L&D roles in your company, and in what ways? Any thoughts on that?
Well, you will have some thoughts on that.
Sure. How likely do you think these new applications are to change HR and L&D roles, and in what ways?
So obviously the ability of leveraging the value of these technologies is dependent upon the capability of the functions that will deploy it. I think that's the first step. And I'll take the example of learning and development. One of the biggest barriers to using AI in organizations is actually the capability and capacity of the L&D function itself within the organization. And therefore, to power the organization, you must power the function first. You know, it's as simple as you have a weak CFO or a weak finance function. In all probability, the financial prudence of that organization will be severely compromised. Specifically to answer your question, I think there has been a significant shift in at least progressive organizations in upskilling and upgrading the capabilities of the L&D function and the nature of services being provided by them. So for example, performance consulting, which essentially again alludes to advisory type of services rather than administrative type of services. Change management, again, how do you shift mindsets and learner behaviors within an organization? Content curation, I mean, curation is a new word for that's been introduced, and you still use the embedded science of instructional design, but you don't create from scratch. So clearly the agility of the learning function is enhanced significantly on account of technology. The question is, if you yourself don't have the ability to use that opportunity, then it's you're letting it go. So clearly we do see the operating model or the TOMs in most organizations actually changing, be it in the case of HR or L&D, with a clear indication that upskilling of those teams is of paramount importance if we are to make use of the technologies that are available.
Thank you. Yeah.
I also, sorry, please continue.
No, why don't you go ahead?
So I have a viewpoint which is pretty much similar to this. You know, how I see L&D professionals' roles really changing. If I may use two words, one is content, two context, really. You know, all this while, I guess, as L&D professionals, we were focusing on creating content, and our life used to revolve around that. But now the content is easily available at a click of a button, and we are not really required in organizations for that. You know, because the way millennials are really learning, it's all there on the mobile. So our roles, what it really becomes is adding that context of the organization to it. Creating platforms for social learning. And how do we make sure that we are leveraging social learning integrated with really the technology, you know? And some of the examples in my previous organizations, we had experimented using edX and social learning, and it beautifully really turned out to be the impactful program. So I guess the roles are changing from that perspective, yeah.
If I can add a point here, I mean, on a lighter vein, I wish there was artificial intelligence in politics. It would have helped us find a leader in the last couple of weeks. But on a serious note, I do believe that that end of day, the biggest challenge of AI is going to be on people across both left, right, and center of this room. And I was thinking about it because, you know, I'm no expert in AI. My daughter says I can't even handle an iPhone. But I do feel that if you read about AI, what it basically tells you is that there is an algorithm, and that sets a lot of things into action. Now, just hypothetically tell yourself, because this is also going to be reality, that you are the senior leader in your company. When artificial intelligence is in full flow, the person who's reporting to you at the frontline level, or pretty much junior in the hierarchy, is getting some very automated recommendations to follow. So he or she does not really need to come to you, no matter how senior you are, no matter how experienced you are, to take your concurrence to go ahead with what is coming across from the machine as the most justified action step. So I think the real, possibly the biggest challenge is for people who are actually senior executives in companies. Because AI makes your decision-making highly decentralized. And people who are down the food chain are actually the ones who will, frankly speaking, take a call, because, hang on, you have already implemented AI. And the human element, no matter how experienced you are, how successful you are, and you know what a brilliant track record you have, you yourself could face a certain degree of your own self-imposed professional obsolescence. So I think the real challenge, emotional, career, could really come to people like you and me, point number one. And my second point will be, I think, linked to that, in fact, I was writing it down, is the fact that please do not assume, which came across when I think Mark presented it, is the resistance that you get in terms of the cultural barriers that will possibly come into play. India does not yet, and I am not talking about in India that lives in Delhi and Mumbai, but in India that still, in a great number of ways, is adopted technology. We have 4G phones, and a lot of young people are on WhatsApp all the time. But the truth is that when they see technology becoming, in any case, a predatory threat, then there is a massive resistance to it. And I don't want to make a comment because this might be slightly political, but the truth is that in a country facing a massive job crisis, even if you say that in the long term, it will all result in a massive economic boom and the data of $13 trillion of revenue in the next decade may be a reality, but people are asking, what's going to happen to me tomorrow? What's going to happen to me in the next couple of years? In the long run, we are all dead anyways. So I think these are the two things I wanted to put on the table.
I have a point here from a different perspective, and it will later on maybe connect to what Nishchay was talking about. reInvent is a conference by Amazon Web Services. I have a friend here who works as India head for marketing there. He forwarded me the link that, why didn't you go through that? So reInvent is the conference where the CEO talks about all the products they have. And recently I discovered some of the apps we have were hosted on, there are two services now, AWS, Amazon Web Services, and then you have Azure. So I discovered that world, and 10, 15 days were completely into that. I got mesmerized with the whole thing. I heard him talk about different platform. that today when you're talking about IT, and it all relates to the IT piece when you're talking about the adoption of that, you had infrastructure as a service, you had a platform as a service, and now you have a software as a service. What you do is, you don't need to do anything. You go to Amazon Web Service or Azure, and you have the computing there, you have the data storage there, and you have all your things there. And what Amazon has done is your machine learning, you have all the hooks and nixes and tags there. You can start picking up what you want. You can create machine learning right away, all of us. So I did that also. You can log on to AWS at 2 rupees, okay? And you can try the free courses there. I have done that. So in that 15 days, I discovered a lot of things on that. So coming to the point, what your basic point from the reInvent, 75% or 80% of the users of Amazon or Azure are startups. 20% are your traditional businesses. So they got one insurance company which is trying to move their legacy systems, which might be interesting to you, okay, onto AWS. Now, when 75 or 80% of the startups are onto that, and 20% traditional organization, and the demise rate of organizations is not more than 30 years. So you're right, the data makes sense, because those are the organizations which will survive, and your traditional organization will either collaborate, merge with these new organizations. So that data is there. Now to connect to Nishchay's point, all L&D or anybody will have to have startups within their own frameworks. Every year will have to be treated like startups to adapt all these technologies, because your traditional CFO, traditional approach of budget approval will also not allow you to do that. Our dear friend would have gone bust if would have been waiting for a CFO to approve his plan to do a podcast with you and how the budget will be prepared. He'll be dead by then. Okay. So I'll just add one more thing there. So one is you need to have those startups within your thing, and not many organizations will allow that. That is a big deterrent here.
It's off.
Topic and issue of agility too. So how do organizations?
One is that, and secondly, second piece is personal. The last point is the personal adaptability to technology is huge. You give me a technology, I will adopt it. Now the speed at which individuals or employees adopt to technology and organization as a whole adopt to technology, there is a light year difference. So till that time, people experience technology. You experience Netflix. Everybody spoke about Netflix here. I want to be the Netflix. Twice I heard, thrice I heard. But the difference is I have experienced Netflix, and I'm looking at other apps now. Netflix is going down. Today, they lost $16 billion in the last 3 days. They are saying, hey, we want to launch a cheaper service for India. Something else is moving on. So individually, I am on Netflix, and you're saying you want to be a Netflix by when Netflix will be finished. So that's the gap between individual adaptation and corporate adoption, which also is a concern, two concerns, startup and individual and corporate adoption.
Okay, real quickly.
So number one, I just wanted to add to Sanjay's points. One, tech disruption itself is a misnomer, in my view, because it has a negative sentiment, attached to disruption. The question is, can we turn that on its head and act out of performance rather than act out of fear? Because clearly that's the messaging that I think is far more powerful and engaging to employees, and for the nation that we are, there is Bharat and India, and we have to be conscious of, when we talk about tech disruption, how people relate to that. That's the first point I wanted to make. The second, in terms of L&D and HR, I think more and more we're seeing, hearing this term get invisible and get out of the way of employees. Content is available and it is king. I think context is the kingdom. And what AI does, in fact, is aggregate content which is freely available from the open source and contextualize it for the learner within the organization. And that's the power of AI. By simply doing that alone, by using AI and ML and NLP, you're actually optimizing your spend considerably as an organization, because that's all for free, which was never ever tapped and now you have the ability to aggregate and curate content which is freely available. Now, does it lead to deep skilling? Perhaps not, because then all content providers will be out of business. But clearly, there's so much more that's available today than was earlier.
Absolutely.
So, Mark,
Okay,
just one question that I have.
yes,
Just
really
one
quickly.
question. In this research, have you also covered in terms of employees' comfort? So while we are talking of context, content, and all that, I just keep that aside. Do we have any research which talks of what employees say in terms of whether they're comfortable? How much of them are comfortable using the social mediums, platforms, and all this AI-based
So-
settings?
We do.
So just to, if I could just ask, actually, a very related point there. We are a research, analytics, and data management firm, and in fact, our tagline is "Mind and Machine." Powered by Mind and Machine, eValueServe. So, and in context of HR, there are just way too many things we have experimented with, right from different social media to chat bots to coach bots. Also, you mentioned coaching. I'm a coach myself, and we have actually, for the purpose of scalability, used coach bots as well. So we've tried several of these things, but unfortunate part is that the adoption isn't that great right now. And to your point, right, how while we are talking about speed of introduction, we're talking about how soon are we, will we be able to catch up with the volatility and the pace at which the world is moving? That's all fine. Yeah, but end of the day, are we internally prepared? Is there any need for that? It's also something that we should probably pause and think about. And in your presentation, you talked about driverless cars, for example, right? Now, while it makes a lot of sense in probably the Western world, in Indian context, I'm not sure. Last year, I heard our then transport minister, talked about the fact that maybe it doesn't make sense for India given our context, right? So not everything that's true for rest of the world makes sense for us, or in the context of the conversation we are having, not everything that's working for larger organizations would work for probably a mid-sized organization, for example.
Right.
So I think there is a lot to be kind of thought and implemented with respect to your specific organization and the roles that you have in mind.
Absolutely, and the culture and society,
Cultural
et cetera.
context, yeah.
And so when we look at what are the keys for success, and this is according to the experts, it's about good decisions. We don't have a lot to say about that, although it's really important that as organizations are thinking about what are they going to automate, that they bring people into that decision process and do it very early. And what we found is this is a way not only for change management, but to gain the champions and their mind share. The technological expertise and the quality data, of course, that I alluded to. And what we're talking about today, and this is what really sets the stage for looking at the data, is are the human attitudes, skills, and capabilities. And so, well, what is the impact then of AI on people? Clearly, it's going to accelerate changes to roles. It's going to change the way people work. Their job descriptions are going to change. If they're not displaced, they're going to be transitioned to very different responsibilities. It's going to increase the need for skills that can complement AI. We talked about that machine-human partnership. How do they enable each other? And what does that mean? It's going to create concerns around fairness, privacy, and security, which we'll talk about a little more. And these are really interesting topics, I think, in the context of employee engagement and culture. And it's going to impact the manager-employee relationship. So as machines begin to make decisions that impact employees, how will they react to those decisions that come from a machine versus that comes from their manager? And what does that mean for that relationship? And so to get into the research, we surveyed almost 3,900 respondents. You can see the breakdown. This was an online web-based survey that took place in January of this year, January and February. We expanded it to 13 countries. We started originally with 11 and then expanded to 13. We've since gone to 22. We were looking at ASEAN and some of the other countries as well, and across a wide range of industries. And so, again, the questions were around, so what are the attitudes of employees? What are they thinking? Are they as fearful as the press seems to suggest? So we asked this question, AI will fundamentally change the way we work and live in the next 10 years. So what's your level of agreement with that? And you can see, just less than half, about 44% strongly agreed. And then we asked whether or not they expect those changes to be positive. 84% said the changes would be positive. So this is somewhat contrary, I think, to what we read about this fear. And in some of the latter data, we see that it really, at least employees are recognizing that it really offers them an opportunity to do more meaningful work. And so as I present some of the country data, the panel are encouraged to offer any insights from their marketplace. This was the question then you saw on the previous slide for the world. AI will fundamentally change the way we work and live in the next 10 years. Strongly agree. And then how positive or how do you expect those changes or how positive do you expect those changes to be? And so we see some significant differences. I must say first, India is always high. In all the studies we've ever done, they're high. And we did a little data mining in our database and found that it was a slightly higher percentage of IT companies and a slightly higher level of people in the data set, in the sample. We controlled for it for as much as we could, but and my theory is that this partially explains it, and there may be other cultural and business environment issues that explain it as well. But any comments from the panel on your particular market around the optimism?
I've got a, sorry, I had a quick comment there. I think India, specifically for India as a market, my observation is that whatever is convenient sells fast here and works as well. And I want to lay a quick example here. It's just the way we run as a society. Also, I mean, if you look at how children learn, I've got two young boys at home, one's 7 and one's 2. So my 2-year-old, once we're driving, my wife's in front, my kids are belted at the back, and we're driving to a restaurant. And suddenly, my 2-year-old says, "Okay, Google, play nursery rhymes." Now, we're sitting in a car, we're driving, and he suddenly says that. He just didn't realize that my car does not have a Google Home device. He's so used to doing it at home that he says, and then I saw a sudden smirk go on his face because the song didn't change because we were playing something on the radio. He's just so used to interacting with devices that, imagine, he's 2. He doesn't even use a computer. I think the future is not really about us interacting with machines, but I think a lot of voice will kind of dominate in our interaction with machines, and therefore learning will be faster. So whatever technology and AI can do to make things convenient, I think will win in the future. And that's why I think, I don't know about other markets much, but in India, people latch on to anything that's convenient super, super fast.
Yeah, like just, I think my point actually piggybacks off of, is it Upasana? Yeah, before, around, is something relevant? I mean, do we actually need it? If you look at the Australian data, I mean, 40% people actually even thought about how fundamentally changes. And if you think about Australia, we've been pretty lucky. 27 years of economic growth, only maybe this year starting to slow down a little bit. But there's a whole generation that's never understood what a recession is. And so when you live in that kind of context, you kind of realize, yeah, in terms of how much understanding or adoption of something like artificial intelligence, because Australians line on solving problems is really just, no worries, mate. It's all good. And so, I mean, just looking at that data, I mean, I find that actually to be quite compelling in the sense of just how little understanding there is about, the impact of the technology.
Can I just say about the UK as well? I don't think we can claim the same in the UK. When I see that figure of 31% actually think that AI will fundamentally change the way we work in the near future. I mean, that just smacks to me that we've all got our head in the sand, and we lag behind on positivity about it as well. I think to a large extent in the UK we are victims of the media and the press. So I think the negativity, the focus on what I call celebrity AI, so driverless cars and Amazon drones and things, means that people don't I don't think generally think too hard about the positive implications in the future world of work. But my biggest concern, and on the flip side for India the opposite, is readiness to embrace it. And looking at those figures, I would say India looks like, as a nation, you are ready to embrace what's coming, ready to see it almost entirely as positive. So yeah, good news for India. UK, we've got some work to do.
And go ahead. I'm sorry, Paula.
No, I was just adding actually to what Adil is saying, is that the reality is that we are the IT company hub, right? So technology is in any case easily adopted in the corporate world. But the demographic of the country also tells you that we are a young country. So very young country is always open to technology, and I think that kind of explains 96% positive orientation, possibly. I talk to my daughter sometimes, and she's like, I don't care about privacy. They don't care about privacy. Possibly they don't know the implications, but they're like, oh, they're going to map me anyway. They go, I'm not going to stop living on the net. So they know about me, so they don't care about it. They don't think about it. So that's the level of embracing that's actually happening, and maybe that's what's reflecting on the figures.
Mm-hmm. We also asked then, how worried are you about losing your job as a result of AI? And just 43% said at least moderately worried, and it was moderately or very worried. Again, so maybe somewhat lower than what we see in the press. And then this we thought was interesting. What percentage of people were positive about the potential of AI to allow them to focus on more meaningful work? And I think this is really where we as HR leaders, as organizational leaders, is something that is going to make a very strong impression and go far in creating not only awareness, but in embracing, getting them to embrace and to accept. So how worried are you about losing your job by country? Someone interesting, I think, that and so just about 60% in India, somewhat or very worried, and 93% though, however, said that it allowed them to focus on more meaningful work.
On the previous question, they said 43% are moderately worried, somebody is slightly worried, not worried. But how come the 69% is positive? How was the question put? How was the question phrased? So that when they are worried, they are positively worried. How it is?
Right.
Well, I guess it means that, what I'm doing today, I'm most likely to not do anymore, but I will get the opportunity to do more meaningful work as a result of it.
The question was...
You're gonna, the red light.
It's interesting to see this data, right? Because I think the tonality in most organizations has been to use the stick to try and drive something through, and for the most, and I'm generalizing, so nobody should get offended. But it's that, again, act out of fear rather than act out of performance. So while the messaging might be FOMO, right, the fear of missing out, do it now, otherwise you're going to be irrelevant, you won't have a job. And then there are clearly, these anxieties people are carrying into the workplace every day, be it the fear of failure or the worry of financial insecurity or the doubt of intention. These are some anxieties that during this period of transition and transformation are live and kicking in every person. But at some level, I do believe in the way the data comes through is that the human mind, and especially the audience that you have interviewed and surveyed, has been able to interpret and look at the positives of AI and how they apply it to themselves. Because I see both, right? You're seeing, and that's why I'm trying to make sense of the information, is one, it is clearly driving, there is a fear, and it's live and kicking because that's the narrative in the press, in the media, in conferences. Everybody says by 2020 you won't have any jobs, and all that kind of messaging is out there. And at the second, and clearly organizations are also saying, we better do this now, or, else. So that continues to exist in organizations. And at the same time, people are very positive. I guess because AI is not limited to jobs and work alone. They're already experiencing the benefits of that in their daily lives in so many different fields.
And we did find when we cut some of the data, those who are more familiar with the technology, with AI, obviously had much more positive attitudes, which makes sense.
Mark, if I can be the devil's advocate on this chat. I remember a couple of decades ago, there was a similar romanticism associated with globalization. I remember every country in Davos and all the big nations of the world, especially the big democracies like America and Britain, talking about why globalization will change the world and increase output, get jobs, right? One of the reasons why we have some very colorful political personalities in the world today dominating their countries is because of the backlash on jobs that never happened. And end of day, there is a complete revulsion against it, which is why I believe despite winning the World Cup, you have Brexit to worry about. and I guess you have a pretty turbulent turbulent issues in America. And I think
you can blame us.
Yeah, so I do feel somewhere that when we are looking at artificial intelligence today, I mean, I can understand the fact that there's a novelty. There is an obvious benefit. I agree with that. I agree when I saw the movie Artificial Intelligence in the year 2001, I think. It was Steven Spielberg's biggest commercial disaster. People said he should make movies about sharks and leave it at that. But the truth is that it was ahead of its time, and now we are talking about artificial intelligence in a very serious conference right now. So while accepting that is inevitable perhaps, I think we also need to bite into it that perhaps every country, while we have done a survey across countries, every country will have to manage its own cultural dynamic. And like it or not, it does have a major social, political impact that will come into play, because governments win mostly on jobs created or not. So I think while large companies, I do admit, will go for automation because you need to show profits and you need to impress your shareholders, there'll be many companies which will have to take their own call as to how do they balance the cost-benefit issue here.
Mark, if I could just quickly add, just to Nisha's point, I mean, if you think about how much fear and bad news gets sensationalized in the media, but I would say at the core of it, I mean, this is human nature. What we're trying to show here is that people are propelled forward by hope. I mean, if you think about the early explorers, you get on a boat to sail for new land without knowing whether there was new land across the ocean. Whereas I think a lot of this stuff, it's, if you think about, the major changes in society, for the most part, have been propelled by positivity. And I think this is backed up by the research.
Yeah, can I just...
Yes, please.
One more? So I think what, as we look around and again the discussion, I think one thought that comes to one's mind and the serious challenges that we have in the organization is the leaders who are really driving the decision making does not understand this subject too well. And and I think very large organization like ours who've made significant investment are very willing, but willy-nilly even our people feel we are pretty much, let's say, digital fashionista. Because there is, so I think one of the things that, learning organization like yours, and I was talking to a very senior PwC partner just the other day, and what he's saying is, for us now, we are not allowed to sell till I have got myself trained and certified. So I think some of the things that we have to do if we want to make this, whatever choice we make, the social, the real, the technology, the business, I think it's very, very important as HR professionals, learning and otherwise, to really see how we can get the senior leaders really become more knowledgeable about this subject. Otherwise, sentiments could be something, something else could be happening on the ground. So just some help on that would really, really be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we get into our point of view around trust of organizational leaders, and even in change management a bit later, we address that. And we wanted to show this data really talks
And,
about.
and I'm
yes,
really
please.
including us
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
I'm including really
Yeah.
us as well. Yeah.
How soon do you believe AI technologies will impact you in your current role? So you see some wide variation here. But overall, the impacted within 5 years or 1 to 5 years is pretty high. So I think that what this suggests, and maybe what you alluded to, employees may not even know that artificial intelligence has been deployed, or it may be some other kind of technology that isn't AI, and they may think it is. I think that as they become more intimately impacted by it, and they understand it, and there's that transparency, then we may see some wider variations. Those who just won't get on board, those who won't embrace it.
Consumers, not just part of the organization, and all of us have been impacted. It sort of gives me a feeling that this is reflecting more of, outside the organization, context,
Right.
more than inside.
Yep.
When I look at this data and, when I look at the India numbers.
Yep.
So, I don't know, maybe the group or whatever, but it is more reflective of a more generic context than
Sure.
inside the organization.
Sure.
So just one question. So one more question, Mark. Developed countries vis-a-vis a developing country. I mean, India is still a developing country, according to me. So, if I see that people were already impacted at a much lesser percentage in developed countries vis-a-vis developing countries. Any specific reason because of that? I mean, is it jobs? Is it specific task? Or like she mentioned, is it because we are just, okay, Google Play, no,
Why is it more prevalent in developed countries?
For example, if you have Australia, we have
Yeah.
Finland. Why is the numbers if India much higher in terms of already impacted vis-a-vis their numbers much lower? So ideally, I thought the number should be much higher on that side.
Yeah, and this does not completely align with some of the other data that I've seen that suggest markets are more susceptible to artificial intelligence when there are high-paying jobs with routine activities, right? Because those will be the first candidates where companies can see that they can gain productivity and cut costs. And so some of this doesn't necessarily align with that, and I don't have an answer for that. So.
Yeah,
I think the answer may lie in the responding set, because you said majority of the companies that you interviewed were IT companies. Is that? Yeah, so that's overly, yeah, there's a bias built in there, because all of them they won't survive if they weren't deploying AI.
If I may, but if I just pick up what Neeru said, I think what data that you showed in the last couple of slides versus what the McKinsey report says. Now, McKinsey report says that 2030, India will just be 15% impacted by the productivity. So there is a paradox clearly, and I think, Sanjay, to what you said, I don't know if it's only a country culture which will impact how fast you embrace the AI. But I do feel that it is going to be about your wage cost and how much repetitive work you have. So I think there has to be a reason why, while everybody here in India says, oh, they are ready to doing it, but really there is no, at least one of the studies says that there is no reason why it'll happen in India in the next 10 years. So there is definitely beyond just the respondent base, which tends to disagree. So.
And so we asked, what are the primary concerns with AI? And we see, of course, a fair number or a high percentage, majority said there were privacy concerns, cybersecurity concerns. So is my data being used? And if so, how is my data safe? And, Pallavi's point, I think, was that, there are some individuals, younger generations, that really don't care. And if those applications are for commercial purposes, maybe they don't. You know, they show them more ads of things that they want to buy, and that may not be a detrimental effect. But if that data is being used to make decisions about your well-being, whether it's an insurance company looking at your data and charging you more because they're assuming that you have a higher risk of disease, or if your data is being used to infiltrate this privacy that has significant impact on yourself as opposed to just the commercial impact. The other two that we saw were biases built into the AI systems by humans and legal issues related to AI. And we'll talk more about the biases and some of the ethics that are involved. But clearly, the data come with inherent biases, right? And you know, one of the arguments is that, is it better to have an AI system that has inherent bias that can be identified, and it's for an entire group of people, as opposed to bias from human decisions, where there may be individual biases that is more difficult to you know, take to court or to identify what that bias is or what that ethical concern is.
So I Mark, definitely feel, I don't know what everybody else here thinks of it, but I believe the privacy issue is going to be a predominant challenge in this area. And I think justified. I mean, I agree that most of us sign blindly into any agreement when we get into social media, virtually giving Facebook access to everything we do. But the fact is that Facebook has faced a $5 billion fine. It's not chicken curry. So, you know, somewhere at the end of the day, I think systems will remain, I think, no matter how much they benefit customer, employee, et cetera, the fact remains that an individual remains susceptible. The White House has been hacked. You had probably a debate going on whether Trump became the president because of the Russian abuse of social media. And I think those vulnerabilities will only amplify. I think it's wise and prudent that while we can all talk about the virtues of artificial intelligence, is to know the downsides. I think to know what are the risk factors actually helps you succeed going forward.
Absolutely.
Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide, please? See, the way you have put it here, I don't know what the way questions were framed. You seem to be talking about the data subject whose data it is and the organization. The issue goes much beyond that. I can warn that if next year you are holding this forum here, you may not have Marriott, because Marriott has been fined $123 million last week. British Airways has been fined the previous day.
Yeah.
So, and what Sanjay mentioned, 5 billion, I mean, it's a combination of various violations, including Cambridge Analytica.
That's
so the issue is not between data subject and the organization. Issue is there are people out there to hack your data, and they can do anything. And I mean, you know what happens on the dark web. Yeah. So the challenge that we have is that we as data subject don't really know what happens with our data. If you people have, I mean, those who have entered here and have left their visiting cards at the reception, unless it is in the control of this group or the organizers, you don't know what may happen.
That's right.
That's right. And God save the king. Marriott, I mean, what more do you want?
That's right.
Credit card numbers, expiry date, CVV number, mobile number, and email ID. What more do you want to create havoc?
So from an HR perspective, what would you say is some immediate things that HR should be really aware of?
So the key question to be answered there is how much is too much? So when you talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, analytics, big data, cloud, etc., my one line would be that at any stage, if you are able to drill down to the level of an individual, that is where, I mean, it has to stop one step before that, number one. Number two is you have to build in privacy by design, and privacy by design will mean your systems will not have capability to do that.
Your thought process will be like that. The culture will be that I want to be data frugal. I want to gather only that data which is absolutely essential. I mean, we Indians and many other organizations, we are so data hungry. More the merrier.
And that's a good segue into the
we may
next
need
area.
it today, tomorrow, day after. We may need the employees' data, employees' families' data, uncles' data, aunties' data. I know.
Yeah.
TCS, we do such huge recruitment, the kind of questions that we ask, the kind of data that we gather. So
And so that really gets to what our core point of view is, and what you saw in the video, I think, is, you know, the things that we as HR leaders and of course as organizational leaders that we need to help enable them to, is to ensure that transparency, right? And I think if there's transparency around privacy, comfort and knowledge and trust that these organizations will use my data in an ethical and fair way is really important. And that gets us linked to the second T, as we call it, and that's trust in my organization's leadership. Are leaders making the right decisions that is in the best interest of the organization, that's aligned with the mission and the values? Or are they seen and perceived as making decisions based on productivity, cutting costs, right? And so how do we as leaders help to ensure that this trust is developed so that employees are engaged with, they accept it, and they embrace it? And then finally, the last T is transition, and that's when employees are confident that they have the skills to transition to adapt to changes resulting from AI. So is my organization preparing me to work within this new workplace? And so this is the core, and Paula, what do we have, 40 minutes that we'll get through these? More or less? Oh, half hour, okay.
actually, the trust part is much easier to handle.
I'm sorry?
Trust part between the person and the organization is easier to handle.
Yeah.
I mean, when I look at Tata Group or TCS, where I'm working with, I've been working in TCS for almost 23 years. So trust part is less of an issue. The bigger issue is the accidents that happen. And they do happen, and they have started happening at a greater frequency. I mean, look at the case of Uber, where even trust is an issue. Uber has already been fined by 3 different authorities, some 700 million pounds, and fines ranging between in that range. There, even the trust is an issue. For a good number of organizations, I would say Google, there won't be an issue of trust.
Yeah.
Microsoft, I don't think there'll be an issue of trust. A lot of corporations where issue of trust will not be there, but accidents happen, and therefore you have to do few more things.
And some of our research we've done, some interviews, we found that there was intentional misguiding or a break of the trust, that fiduciary trust. And as we start with transparency, we asked this question, would you trust and accept the performance appraisal conducted by AI instead of a human supervisor if the criteria was transparent? So we found more than 6 out of 10 would say, yes, I would accept this performance appraisal if I knew what it was based on, if that machine or that algorithm was transparent. What if the criteria was not fully transparent? We saw just about half then would say. So the question then is, human supervisors who often have bias individually, or AI which may have system bias built into algorithms, which is preferable? And we talked a little bit about that. And this is going to be a real issue, I think, that we have to tackle.
I wonder if you can even do that. That's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, automated decision making is a major issue that is happening when you use systems to decide in place of humans. I wonder if you can even do that under the new regimes which are coming.
But it can be a good input to the overall decision. And I think these transitions would have to happen.
I think this is possible. I mean, my own view. Provided we have systems which talk to each other, where data gets fed in the right manner. So if you're looking at, because this particular question would typically come at a point when an appraisal happens, which is primarily performances in mid-year and end of the year. And which ideally in all organizations is data-driven. Should be data-driven and objective and fair. That's what employees want. So I think employees will go with the system more so, provided they have the comfort and the trust that there is systems talking to each other within the firm, and my performance is aptly reflected and showcased.
So there are there are three things, right? We've, I think, very importantly touched upon. One is the purity of intention, because if you build a system knowingly with a bias, then of course it's a compromise on your intention, and that's important. The second is willingness, and the willingness to deploy and use an automated system. The third is capability. Those are three very important aspects for you to successfully deploy artificial intelligence. Now, the type of decision making is equally important, and it's fascinating because I'm trying to compare, and we don't have a data set of India in the breakup of performance management, but let's take that one. Performance management in India, as per the research, is a check in the box. So they're saying, well, the manager anyway isn't playing the role of even providing me feedback and doing a fair assessment. So why not pick a system? And if there's fairness built in and transparency of criteria, I'd rather have somebody doing a performance conversation with me than nobody. And remember, a performance conversation is a signal of self-worth. So it's highly emotive. And logically you'd say, I'd never ever prefer a system engaging with me on something that's so emotive as a subject. It's not logical. You'd have something routine and is standard, and here you're dealing with a person and that person's emotions, and you don't know how that person is going to react. So you'd rather never ever deploy a computer or a system to actually govern that process. But yet, people are saying, look here, I'd opt for it.
Yeah, because I know exactly what I need to do, right?
If there's an inherent bias in the system, an individual might say that's the same bias across everybody, right? So it kind of neutralizes the bias.
It's very interesting. And one of the examples that we've seen, it's human psychology. First you give before you sort of. So in one of actually our group companies, Mahindra Finance, what they've used AI is beautifully. They're actually helping people to earn more incentives using the system. So the last 7 to 8 days of the month, they're actually sharing information with employees because they have this buckets, how much you earn if you make in which bucket, and it's a win-win. So employees are making more money, and to be able to say that if you have to do X rupees of sales or X number of cases, and let's say X plus Y gives you 15% more incentives. So what happens is people do not usually have the numbers and which pocket and which market and which segment. So what the sales, what the business team has done is they're now sharing those information with those guys, saying, A, you are like so many rupees short, and go to this market, go to this city, go to this village, go to this population and make it happen. So it's a huge win-win. And when you possibly set these examples which are enabling employees to make a positive difference, and then when you move into things like performance management, etc., maybe you've created a better pool.
Sure. So on the topic of performance management, I think I agree with Nishya, I guess, that it is a very emotional topic and something very close to heart for most individuals. However, if we do decide to kind of go the AI route, I think the data needs not only to come on the results part of performance management, but also, at least the organizations I've worked with, there has also been a huge emphasis on the how of it or the behaviors part of it. Now, how do you really get that into the system, right, using AI? Now, I'm not saying there's no way to do it. I'm sure there are ways if we look at several data points, for example, the awards, recognitions, the client feedback, XYZ, and find a way to somehow make sense from all these different data points and use that as an input into the behavior side of performance, and then there is goal side of performance, and then you find a way to club it, and then you have a more intelligent conversation with the individual or the employee. Probably they'll buy it. But in the absence of that, it is a pretty incomplete picture and not something that most people would kind of like to go with. That's what I
Or there may be hybrids
I
at
also
some point.
agree with what she's saying. We all understand the human part cannot be taken out of the performance management. Everything is not quantitative. The qualitative part of the performance, how it will get the real notice by the seniors or the management. You know, the very purpose of performance management is not only control, it's the developmental side as well. Now that developmental side gets a real blend through the data and through the human intervention. Then you get the real result, because after 1 year of performance, it's not that you're only talking about performance. You're talking about his development also, how part also, what he has done, what he has contributed. Now, all those things cannot come out only by AI or only by data. Now, it has to be a blend of both. The human, the supervisor or the manager really has to work hard to take care of his team, and he has to converse with that man. What went wrong, what he could not do, what he could have done better. But that part cannot be substituted by anybody. So therefore, it has to be a combination.
Absolutely. Another question that we asked about transparency.
You have some data on companies actually using it now? How many companies is it?
Yeah, the performance review?
Yeah, for a present, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think, however, there's a hybrid model now. I don't think in any organizations, at least from what I've read, are using it as a sole data point. Yep. No. Would you... Would you trust and accept a performance appraisal conducted by AI instead of a human supervisor? I alluded to this earlier, and so you see, again, some of the significant differences between those that, where the criteria is transparent and where it's not transparent.
So the India data, again, confirms that point of view, because it is a check in the box. That's one of the biggest risks that was identified when you did a risk analysis across areas. This was one significant risk, that performance management isn't treated to be a strategic intervention within an organization. In fact, it's
Nishya, I would want to know from you, because you have been in this field for long now. It's that every organization and any HR leader would say is that we want a people manager capability around giving feedback and performance, and coaching. In spite of that, today we are sitting in this room and we are talking about AI, that this is an area which is a gap and people are not doing a good job. So why do you think that would be really?
It's interesting, right? Because we all recognize the need for managerial capability. IMA did a very interesting research, which I had been involved in it for a number of years, called the Management Capability Index. And people leadership, and these are all senior executives that get interviewed through that research. People leadership is their weakest area. So these are all senior leaders saying essentially across all dimensions of capability, people leadership is one of our weakest areas. Number two, I think business is busyness, and honestly, I haven't seen the rigor that's required in organizations as far as nurturing and building talent. I've seen a depletion of that capability over the last 2 decades. I don't know, you can weigh in with your own experiences, but my own experience is that when I see managers of today and how they are investing themselves in the future of others, I see very little of it. I think it's far more individualistic, and they're really watching the third, clearly people manager First Time People Manager is a very popular program, right? It's the pet program for most L&D functions. Question is, having attended a program, do you become a good people manager? And clearly not, because it doesn't change the way I think about or the importance given to people development in an organization. That's just my view. I've been very disappointed with that aspect of corporates, is that they haven't necessarily been able to build the next generation of leaders and build the next generation of people managers.
Okay. Yeah, no, I apologize. Pallavi is nudging me because we don't have a lot of time left. So let me get through the rest of the data. Hold your questions, and we can visit them at the end. These were some questions for discussion that you could just take note of and either reflect on it yourself, or we could bring it up afterwards. You know, what does it mean to be transparent? What are the barriers in your organization to be transparent? Is it an understanding? Is it intentional? Is it a lack of communication? And how much should be revealed? There was an HBR article not long ago that showed, you know, people want to know, but they don't want to know too much. And so how do you make that decision, a very fine line of how much we should divulge? And then how can you as leaders support transparency? So as we move on to our second T, trust, we found this. This is through PwC. 2 out of 3 CEOs says it's harder for businesses to sustain trust in the digital age. They believe AI and automation will affect trust levels in the future. Again, these are all about 2 out of 3, 66+%. And the impact on corporate culture from our study, how concerned are you? And we looked at the director, we asked director level and above, how concerned are you about AI's potential impact on your corporate culture? And so almost 2/3 said at least moderately or very worried. So from a country standpoint, we see some differences again. India consistently high. You know, although certainly the UK was, you've gotten a little bit higher there compared to some of the other ones. How concerned are you about the potential impact on corporate culture? And you can begin to think about, well, what are some of the implications of it that's going to affect culture? Transparency, trust. Trust is what we're talking about here. And it's vital to success. So we asked this question, how much do you trust your current leaders to make the right decisions about implementing AI? We asked director level and above, they told us 63% trusted their leaders to make those decisions. Of course, many of them are themselves, right? So we're assuming they trusted themselves. 47% of managers and just over a quarter of individual contributors. And so, you know, obviously there's some significant differences here. And somebody made the point earlier that leaders need to understand the impact on employees. Yes? 63%?
They're not trusting themselves.
Right. Yeah.
37%.
Low trust.
Yeah.
I think the other challenge that comes in performance management is that how and who does actually decide what's fair? How do you know that the rating that you're giving someone is fair? Because everybody has their own source of truth, and there's no single transparent bedrock that will actually tell you, okay, this is what this person or someone else did. But if there is a way for AI to kind of come and augment this and support this source of truth, if it will, then I think it can make a tremendous difference. Because like they say, data is the new oil, but AI is the combustion engine. And I think only if it helps us augment this and give us a more fair rating in a fair environment, then I think we all win.
Yeah, it has to be that way, right? Because, you know, my manager, I know that they're going to be fair, and it so happens that they like me a lot, or we're good friends, right? And yet my colleague may think it's not fair. So really combining that with the machine more objective analysis and prediction, I think, is valuable. So trust in leadership by country. I thought this was interesting. I don't know if, somewhat lower in our other English-speaking countries on each side of the world. I don't know if you have any
If I
thoughts.
just add a very quick comment here. I mean, I think when it comes to decision making, when it comes to leadership and decision making, is leaders often don't understand the issue. If you think about how innovation is set up in organizations, is we focus so much on new ideas and solutions, but how good are we actually at contextualizing and framing the problem, which is something which often is missing. So when a senior leader is sitting there, they'll get 30, 40 great ideas every month. But, I mean, without actually knowing what's needed, what's important, and I think understanding that is the framing the problem part is probably quite important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, AI matters for trust and culture. Would you apply for to an organization that uses AI to monitor your activities? And of course, companies have always monitored employees' activities. I mean, back to the day where you have a card to swipe in to get in and out, and if you have a corporate laptop, of course, there's always monitoring. But the AI applications now are so much more invasive and personal that through language recognition or through sentiment analysis and evaluation of things that me as an employee are writing not in the company, but in social media, right? So would I apply to an organization, or how likely? And again, we see the differences here. All respondents, just about half. Directors and above, about 7 out of 10, and just less than a third of individual contributors. So the question then is, what do we do with this? The fact that our leaders may or may not understand that those frontline people have less trust in me as a leader or an organization of what we're doing than I do. And so I think this is an interesting point of conversation. And as HR leaders, what can we do then to make them aware of that? Again, we show this by country. See some of the same patterns, I think, that we have before. Would you apply to an organization that uses AI to calculate the probability of an employee quitting? This was a little interesting as well, almost 3 times, or almost twice, or over twice. Yes, yes, that's a good point, yes. And then by country, again, we see some of the same patterns. And again, as we mentioned earlier, IBM claims that they have an application that predicts by 95% whether someone will leave the organization or not. So, one of the questions from an ethical standpoint is, should my behavior, actions, should I be judged based on what I'm doing today and not my intention? So I don't intend to quit. However, according to this algorithm, I'm likely to quit because something I've said or how I've engaged someone else. Well, I may not have any intention of quitting at all. So again, there's this inherent bias, security, privacy issue.
That's a generic issue about anything related to an algorithm, right? Because algorithms are using past data to predict future behavior, and we all know that past data, that human beings don't necessarily behave in predictable ways. They change, and their past data is not necessarily a predictor of their future behavior. So there is a fundamental gap or possibility of a risk over there.
And 2 other questions for discussion that you can just take note of and reflect on, or we can talk about afterward. Is it okay to use any employee communication to generate predictions? Why or why not? I mean, is that then getting back to the issue of trust? Will individual employees eventually be treated differently based on predictions of their future behavior? Right?
That's it.
So just one other one. This is the recognition and appreciation. And so, again, you see some of those differences. And by country. And we can give them the slides.
Sorry?
We're going to share these slides?
No, but they've got the paper.
Okay.
They've
Yeah,
got the paper.
it's in the paper. And again, so what do these differences in responses between leaders and individuals, individual contributors tell us about trust in the organization, and what are some of the barriers to building and maintaining trust? And where are there opportunities for us to facilitate trust, right? Finally, the preparing people to transition. And, I think this is one of the more interesting concepts and notions around this, because it is what it gives people that optimism and that positivity about engaging and embracing artificial intelligence if they feel prepared. That is to say, they'll feel confident and positive about it if they have those skills, those relevant skills, that they can ensure that they'll be able to survive or upscale and get another job somewhere else, but that they won't be redundant. And so some of the things that you see it changing, and we may see this in our organization, sort of traditional job descriptions moving toward project-based work. So as AI applications take over activities, no longer do I have this traditional job description. I'm called on and asked to participate in teams to work on projects. Right? Those kind of things that aren't automatable, that aren't necessarily routine. Operational to insight-driven. Right? Again, as those operational activities are automated, I'm going to have to bring insight. And the ATM, automatic teller machines back in the 80s, and everybody thought that would be the death knell of the bank teller, right? And so they were just simply reskilled and charged with more insight-driven financial, offerings, dimensional recognition or recommendations and service, exactly. Yeah. And then finally, this mono-skilled versus multi-skilled, moving from this is my job, this is what I do, I'm a financial analyst, and I crunch these numbers, to then having that being automated and being responsible now for other types of forecasting, for communicating to leaders what's taking place in the financial situation. And 68% said getting additional training would be very or extremely important to avoid losing their jobs.
So Mark, are we
Yes.
seeing potentially the world moving towards a gig economy? Because clearly in this situation, I see a lot of contractual employment, and to that extent, a big social economic challenge.
Absolutely, and I think that as leaders, as we develop managers, they're going to need to understand how to manage people that may not be necessarily sitting in a desk across from them every day, or that may not necessarily be, in the United States, a W-2, a full-time employee, but they have other roles and responsibilities in other organizations, maybe they're a contractor. And so those are very different dynamics when you manage a team of a group of people who may be remote and who may engage in the gig economy.
Sorry, just a minute. There's this. Yesterday, I just read a research which I've again found extremely high figures in that research, which just came up on LinkedIn, that said that 90% of working adults in India say they prefer working as freelancers. I was staggered because I thought we all like to work in jobs and have steady service, but this particular research, which was published, curated by somebody on LinkedIn, said that 90% said that they were willing to be freelancers. And I'm thinking about all the trends. If you have a trend where people don't like to stay in a job for too long, you have a trend where skills are not that long lasting, then companies are going to be hiring for skills and not for human beings. And then you're not necessarily going to look for many attributes. You're looking for people to hire a skill for that particular project and then move on. So possibly gig work.
It's going to be, so the research in fact says that it's going to be an Uber of some sorts. So, where there is, whatever is fixed today is flexible tomorrow. So there is no workspace which we traditionally want to go to. You want to go to an office. There is no concept of office. There is no concept of employees because they're on the move. So employees choose the project they want to get into. So it's like going onto an app and finding out the project they want to work. And both sides you get rated. So there's no concept of appraisals and there's no concept of satisfaction service, because you go onto an app and say, well, thumbs up or thumbs down, that's it. It's an Uber. So whether you decide to pick up a cab or, the passenger will pretty much be the workplace concept. So I think it's what you said. In fact, I've been just thinking through the presentation and how will some of these concepts really apply if that's the era we're moving into, and we're moving into it really fast. So, 90% freelancers, it's project-based work that's knocking our doors. So it's very interesting that you pick it up towards the end of it, but yeah.
There was actually a study just recently, very interesting. They said the majority of managers were more satisfied with the contractors they worked with than their own employees.
So just to add to that, while I see that the world is moving in that direction, and a very simple household urban classic example, right, where carpenters, plumbers, they wanted to be have a full-time job and whatever, now they're leaving and becoming part-timers. But in context of corporate world, I still feel for India, probably it'll take some time. Probably, I may be wrong. But
if I just may add to that, you have practo. I think we come from a society where doctors were the biggest thing. You could not move to a different doctor that you didn't know. Today, all of us, I think pretty much all of us in this room go on to practo when you have to go to a new doctor. I think it's fast changing.
Probably it is. But if you kind of look around, and I was having similar conversations in some other forum sometime back around gig economy, and especially in context of India, China, I think there is a huge cultural context around having a job, right? And if you think about families and your parent, and we are still to a great extent very closely knit family kind of culture
but
in India.
I mean, research is showing you something else, right? Yesterday.
Yeah, which is what I was kind of thinking, that maybe we take it with a pinch of salt.
So you go to universities.
Yeah,
So do a study with the universities. Maybe the generation that we are dealing with, I think a lot of conventional, organizations where you have a mix of various generations working together, maybe you'll get the same feedback. But go to universities, talk to students.
Yeah, sure.
Do that research at that level. You'll realize that I think what Palvi said is very true. People do not want to be associated with one company. They want to just get onto projects.
Oh, absolutely. So I agree. Yeah, I mean, there are the different contexts, and again, without beating the dead horse here. But going back to, again, there was a question around the whole trust bit, and I think this is all interconnected, right? Because people are not staying for long is why the trust is not getting built. And, things are moving so fast that, where is really the time or the opportunity to really have those conversations, instill that trust, get into, some of those things that traditionally corporates have gotten into. So so there are all kind of combinations that are happening around us. So we choose what makes sense for us.
Absolutely, and we asked them, where would they look for those skills that they feel like they need, and I thought this was interesting because, there are some who suggest that people are going to skill themselves up, right? They're going to take responsibility for their own learning and development. Well, according to our study, most said that they would rely on their employer. And this makes some sense from a financial standpoint, of course, but again, it's contrary to some views. And which skills will be needed? Again, almost three quarters said soft skills over the hard skills.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I think this may be those who have an understanding of what it's going to take, but also possibly what they're reading, and with Google and some of these other big companies now, they're hiring for soft skills. They're looking for educational organizations who develop engineers, develop technology experts that come in with soft skills.
I recently read a Deloitte study where they placed people management under hard skills. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
I was just wondering,
Yes.
as today as an L&D manager, whatever we do, if I were to broadly classify our, efforts and training, it would be roughly about 70% we spend time on the will part of things and roughly about 30% on the skill side. Because we believe that if I work enough on the will side of things, the skills automatically, they find ways to address the skill.
Yeah.
Now, given the way, what the scenario is like, what we are talking of in AI, what is going to be the future? What kind of mix are we going to have in terms of, as an L&D manager, what would be the ratio of mix that I need to work? How much on will? Or is there any place for will at all? I mean, it looks like I'll have to convert all the humans into machines to manage machines. So that seems to be where we are going. So where are we heading to? So that seems to be one question mark. Probably some insights.
It's kind of a crystal ball question, maybe. I don't know. I think that clearly, there'll be individual decision, company by company, and the types of artificial intelligence. I think that you see some organizations that are deploying it that not necessarily requiring software designers and some of the HR ones particularly. And so you're going to need a different balance, I think, of those soft skills versus the hard skills, depending on the type of automation. And what we saw in some of our qualitative research is that these companies started very small in one functional area. And it could be something like automating something on the website, or up to one airlines, U.S. airlines we surveyed, that were looking at automating ticket pricing and scheduling. And so very, very different requirements for hard skills versus soft skills, I think.
If I can add to that. Sure. One, the organization's ability to look at learning as a whole. This conversation about hard and soft and this divisive approach of, it's even managed in organizations. I think hard skills for the most are still managed by the business, and soft skills lie with learning and development in most organizations. And that itself, I think, fractures the ability to provide a wholesome learning experience looking at the individual as a whole. That's the first point. The second is, I think it's more important to recognize, not as much as the mix, but what's needed for every single individual.
Sure.
Basis the role that they play today and the role they aspire to play tomorrow. I think both are equally important.
Yeah.
The third, in terms of, I think, the composition or the bucketing or the clustering of skills, we've seen this in organizations. One is, of course, functional and domain. Skills are actually now equally important. I won't necessarily emphasize, again, soft skills being more important than hard skills. But just given the disruption and the rapid pace of change in every area, functional and domain skills are equally important. The ability to understand industries, and that's the third one that's getting added on, because clearly there's a cross-pollination occurring and lines are blurring between, is the health industry purely health alone, or does it have a flavor of retail and e-commerce and telecom all built into one? And the third, of course, leadership and soft skills. So all three, and the composite of all three, I think, are important, but more so looking at an individual and across these buckets,
Evaluating
deploying
them
that.
individually. Yeah, Juliet?
Yeah, I think just to maybe look at that from a different perspective, and that's from the organisational perspective as opposed to the individual. So investing in developing these kind of skills that are on the screen now is about future-proofing the workforce of the organisation. So as AI and technology generally get superseded by the next technological advance, then always there's new development required in the technical elements of work. But these skills are transferable across technologies and across jobs, and having strength and depth in these skills is what will really underpin the success of the workforce. So that's just from an organizational perspective.
Yeah. And we show some of the gaps here when we asked on the blue bar, what will be important, according to the VP level and above, what type of skills will your organization need to adapt to artificial intelligence? And then we asked everyone else, what kind of training have you gotten in the last 3 years? So we see some of these gaps, particularly in communication skills, creativity, which is a big one, critical thinking. Have you been trained on these soft skills within the last 2 to 3 years? That's just the data point from the last slide, but we've cut it by level in the organization. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to go right to the question for discussion. Let's see, how do I get?
But don't you think that that would make sense? Because the higher you go, the more generalist and the more soft skills intensive you become, because then it's about persuasion, it's about visualization, it's about.
When you're really growing there, I mean, these are already part of that. Otherwise, it's difficult to grow actually. So, director level, if he's not able to communicate, I mean, how is he? And then going through that kind of a training, I find hardly any. I mean, a substantial number going
You know,
for
one of the,
training and all.
one of the
I'm
experiences
surprised.
we've had in India is, the Dale Carnegie course, which is our flagship program, based on the book How to Win Friends, Influence People. It's a pure human relations and communication skills program. And that program actually sits in very much as a senior leadership development program. And what they're actually saying is that senior leaders in India are very well placed, and they go to Yale and Harvard to get their leadership development, and that's a lot on business strategy, on knowing their businesses, and all the other two skills that they talked about. But today it's about engaging people. Today it's about making sure that if they're going to be with you for 3 to 5 years, how do you get the most out of that? And that is where the re-emphasis on getting the people skills back in, and the whole business of self-awareness and emotional intelligence and empathy and engaging is taking a priority, because by the time they reach that level, they actually know strategy and business and everything else.
No, I can quite understand why you were stunned by that. Actually, so was I. But I think it is greatly influenced by the segment that you have covered in the survey. To give you one example, let's look at Uber. I mean, a highly valued company. It's got a massive valuation. And Uber's CEO had to step down because of the terrible corporate culture he had created. So the man who's curated perhaps the best kind of revolution in the industry of taxi service, was asked to step down, and the ministry of the government had to intervene to correct the corporate culture of Uber. So I think, possibly where you and I are coming from is maybe the more traditional leaders who have emerged from the ranks, but there are so many startup founders who are brilliant in terms of their, innovative technological acumen, but who have been terrible disasters when it comes to what we call as true leadership. That's where maybe the problem is.
To this data point, by the way, just to cut on the surprise, because see, we run a finance center, and most of my directors are either chartered accountants or MBA finance, right? They are so heavy on domain that their people skills, collaboration, thinking is out of whack. They just don't know what to do, right? So for me to say I will not put them in a training badge, it's like saying I will not teach them A for Apple. I would have to. And therefore, all my Director Plus population is they have individual curated content. They have life coaches. You can tell me what they don't have, I'll give you an award. They have everything what needs to be done to get the job done. But they're really heavy on domain. So I need them to close my statutory books of, say, Canada or Japan or somewhere else. They're very heavy on that, but they're not heavy on people skills, unfortunately.
Still, I'm not able to really understand that, because once you select a director, either you're selecting directly or through a growth process, the parameter that you set for a director obviously should include these kind of things. If he's not able to communicate, how are you selecting him there?
So
domain is one thing which I think is functional, and I agree, Nisha, and I would like to give more weightage to domain, because from the company's performance point of view, I'd like to pick up an expert in the field, definitely. And then maybe if required, develop him for the soft skills.
So I think it's very industry specific.
So, sir,
Yeah, it is industry.
So
I agree on that.
Sir, as a consultant, that we work with multiple firms, and I agree with you, Kashyap, and with the findings as well. So, so while we do our leadership, assessments, and when we work on multiple projects, interesting actually. So, communication, definitely comes up and is thrown out as a large parameter. Now, the question that I wanted to also ask you, and probably others as well. So, communication skills is very broad. And as leaders, and I agree with you that, as you grow up, you obviously imbibe some aspects of communication within the firm. Now the question is, what under communication skills? what are we expecting from the leader from that communication skills that we have quoted here is the question. So if you have any insights, that could be interesting.
So the workplace LinkedIn learning report called out, it's actually similar because they call out creativity as number 1. They call out persuasiveness as number 2. Now, to your point, sir, a lot of this sometimes I think we assume that all the soft skills is only for management of people internally. Actually, it's to manage government, manage stakeholders, manage, all that upskilling, negotiation, persuasiveness, perseverance. These are aspects that are getting infused and built with senior leaders because more and more complexity in the environment to deal with. Dealing with the government, dealing with lobbyists, dealing with investors. So multiple stakeholders. So the application of that soft skill is actually equally so, right? To manage the external environment as well as manage the internal environment, which I think where the emphasis is still being built on. So even though you've established yourself and you're known to be a great people leader, some of that assistance and help may be required for you to actually deal with a new buyer,
And you just said something that struck me. You just said that you would rather hire somebody for functional domain skills.
It's beyond?
And then develop the soft skills. And I think that's precisely what is happening when people are getting promoted to higher levels. They're getting promoted because they're good at what they do and they'll be good at technically what the next job is. But maybe they're not good at various other things like negotiating, persuasion, communication, or even holding a conversation. Today we talk a lot about empathy. What is going to differentiate us from machines is going to be empathy, right? The emotional intelligence or the social intelligence that he talked about. And we do a lot of executive coaching with people who are at very high levels, and they seem to have absolutely no empathy. I mean, there's almost zero emotional intelligence. They just don't get it. They just don't get it.
Yeah.
So they go through a coaching process for that. So possibly that's the kind of stuff that you're...
And just to add...
Another thing to add here, sir, is also to what Pallavi said, is the way people interact today. You've got the veterans, you've got the millennials, and then you've got these iGens who are just coming into your world of work, right? These are 20-year-olds who are just coming in. They don't believe in emails. You might send them emails. I was speaking to Chris Shankar, the CHRO of Infosys. He stopped doing town halls. He says people come and everybody's on their phones. Nobody's listening to town halls. What's the point of doing town halls? Also, if you look at the iGens, they're more responsive to you on Slack. And they don't want you to tell them what to do. They're saying, WhatsApp me what you've done, I'll get it done. Don't tell me what to do, how to do. That's my job. That's what you hired me for. So I think the way people receive, process, and execute information is very different, and that's different from generation to generation. Like a lot of us are probably hanging out today on Twitter and LinkedIn. The generation minus us is all on Instagram and Snapchat. Yeah. And they want to hide away from us, which is why they're on these platforms as well.
Adil,
right?
that's where the difference I was talking about, in the first go within the new startup, new gen set businesses and the traditional. Traditional businesses are still thinking, should they open their Internet Explorer for people to see LinkedIn and Twitter? Okay. So if you go around India, 60% of the organizations say, hey, he's using Twitter on, company server. Okay. Facebook on company server, we are sitting 60% India there. And you're talking about 40% India where you're talking about Slack. God damn it, 90% of people in this room might not be using Slack. So, that is A. And the second thing, sir, what has come out is, you're the third business leader in the last 2 weeks who has said, dump software soft skills. This is third serious discussion in 2 weeks, and I'm talking about $1 billion plus CEO level, which are saying, move to the functional knowledge, move to the, domain knowledge, what you were talking about, and soft skills, just people can find their own thing. That's what, this is the third time in 2 weeks, which has never happened for so long.
There's a reason for that, and the reason for that is you're really, is this working or not? Okay, so the reason for that, I think, is that when you have technology coming in and changing your business models and the way you're working, you need to rewire your technical skills and hard skills,
So, Pallavi,
and
they're
you
not
have to
talking about
do
new
that
skills.
all the time.
They're not talking about new skills. That's the sad part. They're talking about what's there in the business, even the top leaders should know about that. That's the scary piece.
Yeah.
Not the new piece, on Agile or DevOps or, Python should be known by my leaders to do a logarithm. No.
I think
To be fair, right? To be fair to the arguments or the points being put forth in terms of functional and domain knowledge, I think there is an urgency that is known for organizations on that front. Having said that, it's not that they're dismissive, it's about prioritization, and they understand that, look here, if you don't upskill in these 10 emerging technologies or don't get the right quality of talent in terms of domain and functional knowledge, our survival is in question. And we'll get the soft stuff sorted out. I don't think any CEO will stand up and say in a public forum that that's perhaps, I'm just trying to make sense of what you're hearing.
That sense when you say that, it's very clear what you're talking about, that, prioritize, have that done, and then move on. What I'm talking about is the dismissive behavior. And, last 20, 25 years, I've never heard that, not felt. People have done that, prioritize this and, give lesser weightage to the other pieces. This is the third time in 15 days this has happened.
I'd probably give them benefit of doubt just because they're stressed with
I think
domain
the
and
issue was
functional
here
upskilling.
only that if you have
Okay,
a director
we-
level person and a person is occupying a director level on a board, he is expected to have certain level of communication skills. Otherwise, the entire process of growth or selection of this thing is then flawed. That was my point.
I'm sorry, just let me interrupt just one moment. And this is a great conversation. We're at the end of our time, and I would encourage everybody to stay around and continue this conversation. I think it's good stuff. Just the last slide. When we look at those respondents who said they trusted their leaders, they understood AI, and they received the training, they were 3 times more likely to embrace it and to be positive and confident about it. So we talk a little bit about mastering change management and some of the things that we need to do to model, to communicate change, to identify those champions. We know there's going to be a third that are on board, a third that are in the middle, and a third that probably go along the way. But part of the communication skills leaders will need to have is to model and to communicate the impact of the change, why it benefits them, what are the outcomes, et cetera. And so just a few final points for discussion regarding change management. And we could probably talk for the rest of the day on this. Is change management different for AI compared to traditional change management, or is it? And how much change management is done one-to-one? Right. And what are the best practices for leading change, which we've learned through some of our qualitative interviews, particularly around AI? So what can leaders do in the end? Bring that people-focused perspective. I think everyone was on board with that. Advocate for transparency, stay attentive to trust, and ultimately lay the foundation for success with a training strategy that gets to moving from single to multi-skills, moving from or toward rather project-based work versus traditional type work. And those are the type of things I think that we as leaders need to be really focused on, and then finally strengthening the change management, which was only a couple minutes, so we didn't miss a whole lot. So, and that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add one final point, just from my understanding. And look, firstly, love the interaction. I just think the dialogue was fantastic. Look, one thing I've just really wanted to understand and help communicate is, if you think about the core of what we're talking about in human nature, all that stuff, like it all boils down to our ability to create safety. Google ran this research, Project Aristotle, to look at what drives organizations forward. And on the surface, it's all the things which we think, is about skills and benefits, etc. But at the core of it, it's are you able to create an environment and a culture of psychological safety? And that contributes to trust and transparency, to everything we're talking about here. So I think, from that point of view, is look, just it's as much as we're trying to embrace technology and artificial intelligence, don't forget the people side of the business.
Yeah. Great. Juliet, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. My final comment would be to really commend everybody who's in the room, the HR professionals, people champions that you are. Is that I think our role in AI is not so much reacting, responding, even repairing the impact of AI, but to be in there right at the outset, to be part of building the AI strategy to make sure it's entirely people focused, and that I see is the powerful role of AI of HR rather in all of this. So yeah, thank you for your engagement with it.
Pallavi, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I really wish we had more time because there was just so much to. It's just that kind of a topic, and we all have views and experiences to share. But do stay back over coffee and tea, and we will have more conversations in groups. But we just have a small feedback form in your little folders, and would love to get your feedback about how this interaction went, and also in terms of what kind of topics interest you. For that kind of helps us get an idea of what can lead our next research. So please do give us that. And any final comments from anybody, still welcome. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Sanjay.
I just want to make one, as a politician, I'm used to giving free advice. I just believe that sunshine, they say, is the best antiseptic. And nothing works like transparency and honesty. And, let us never assume that just because we are very privileged to understand the complexity of artificial intelligence and the impact on corporate culture that our employees do. I think, there are a lot of apprehensions out there. For many people, let me tell you this, I have experience of how people give you wrong information at the time of opinion poll and exit polls. I don't think anybody knows that better than us. I can tell you for a fact that many people just answer things which appear to be the more socially acceptable, appropriate conduct. And I think very often we take our people for granted. And therefore, my only suggestion will be that please do go dive as much as you can to know what people feel. And whatever are the risks or the pressures that employees will face, tell them. I think people love nothing more than to be told that, there is a curve on the road ahead and there may be some potholes and bumps. That's about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you.
So thank you, and as you finish, your feedback, we'll just have that collected, and we'll just continue the conversation.
Reshma, do we have a group photograph or something?
We have to.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
Yeah.
While we're sitting?
Silos, we want collective.
I think they want more. Is that what they
One. We'll just stand behind there and just, yeah. Let's just finish the feedback, yeah.